The dinner party in the Upper East Side penthouse was perfect. The crystal was polished, the laughter was refined, and the wine was older than the marriage being quietly dismantled at the center of the table. Elena thought the worst thing she did that night was humiliate her husband for driving a sedan while her clients arrived in limousines, unaware that the hand she squeezed under the table belonged to the man holding the pen to her career's execution order. Betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it smiles and pays the check while you're busy apologizing for its lack of zeros. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet shattering of perfect lives and the secrets hiding behind closed bedroom doors, stay with me. There are layers to this deception that we haven't even peeled back yet, and I'd hate for you to miss the moment the truth finally breaks the surface. The humidity in late July New York usually hung over the city like a wet wool blanket, but inside the private dining room of Le Bernardin, the air was crisp, scented with white truffle and the metallic tang of expensive ambition. Elena Vance adjusted the neckline of her silk dress, checking her reflection in the darkened window. She looked successful. She looked like a partner. She looked like she belonged at a table with three of the most aggressive real estate developers in Manhattan. Beside her, Julian looked like Julian. He was wearing his navy suit, the one from Banana Republic he'd bought 3 years ago for a cousin's wedding. It fit him well enough, hugging his broad shoulders, but the fabric lacked the subtle, liquid sheen of the bespoke Italian wool worn by the men across the table. He was listening politely as Arthur Pendleton, the CEO of Archway & Sons, recounted a story about a yachting mishap in Saint-Tropez. Elena reached under the table, her hand finding Julian's thigh. It wasn't a caress. It was a grip. A signal. Sit up straighter. Look impressed. Don't ruin this. Julian turned to her, his hazel eyes calm, reading the anxiety radiating off her like heat. He covered her hand with his thumb brushing her knuckles soothingly. She pulled her hand away. So, Julian, Arthur boomed, pivoting the conversation with the subtlety of a wrecking ball. Elena tells us you're in data? Or is it consulting? I never can keep track of these digital nomad titles. The table went quiet. Marcus Thorne, a rival developer seated to Arthur's left, swirled his Pinot Noir, a smirk playing on his lips. Marcus was everything Elena thought she wanted her husband to be. Sharp, hungry, and wearing a Rolex that cost more than Julian's car. I work in market analysis mostly, Julian said, his voice even, devoid of the bravado that filled the rest of the room. Helping firms understand long-term risk. Risk, Marcus chuckled, leaning forward. That's cute. In this city, if you aren't taking risks, you're just taking up space. You must be the cautious type, the belt and suspenders guy. Elena felt a flush of heat crawl up her neck. She was 34 years old, a senior architect fighting for the Aurora Project lead, and her husband was being patted on the head like a golden retriever. Julian is very steady, Elena said, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright. She took a sip of wine, masking the bitterness on her tongue. He likes his safety nets. Unlike us, right, Arthur? We live for the thrill of the deal. Stability is a virtue, Arthur said diplomatically, though his eyes glazed over, dismissing Julian entirely. But you're right, Elena. The Aurora Project requires guts. We need people who understand that money is a weapon, not just a savings account. Exactly, Elena said. She looked at Julian, expecting him to defend himself, to drop a hint that he was more than just a man who worked from a chaotic home office in their Brooklyn brownstone. But he just smiled, a small, private thing. and took a bite of his halibut. That passivity broke something inside her. "It's actually a running joke at home," Elena continued, the adrenaline of the pitch mixing with the wine. "I'm the one checking the Nikkei at 2:00 a.m., and Julian is usually checking if we have enough points for a free toaster on his credit card." Laughter rippled around the table. It was polite, cruel laughter. Julian stopped chewing. He placed his fork down gently. He looked at Elena, and for a second, the ambient noise of the restaurant fell away. There was no anger in his face, which made it worse. There was only a profound, quiet disappointment, like watching a structure collapse in slow motion. "I like to ensure we have liquidity, Elena," Julian said softly. "Liquidity?" Marcus laughed outright this time. "Buddy, unless you're liquid enough to buy the building we're sitting in, let the big dogs talk about finance." Elena joined the laughter. She forced it out of her throat. She had to. She was one of the big dogs. She wasn't the wife of the coupon clipper. "Oh, stop teasing him," Elena said, waving a hand dismissively at her husband. "Someone has to keep me grounded while I reach for the stars, even if the gravity is a little heavy sometimes." The rest of the dinner was a blur of deal terms and ego stroking. Elena shone. She was brilliant, articulate, and ruthless. Everything the Aurora board would want. By the time the check came, 4 figures easily, Marcus made a show of grabbing it. "On me," Marcus winked at Elena. "I know how expensive ambition can be." The ride back to Brooklyn was silent. The Uber moved through the glittering veins of the city, passing the skyscrapers that Elena worshipped. Julian stared out the window, his profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. "You didn't have to say that," Julian said finally. He didn't turn his head. "Say what?" Elena scrolled through her emails, the blue light of the phone illuminating her defensive frown. "I was just making conversation, Julian. You were sitting there like a statue. I had to bridge the gap. You mocked me, to people who don't know me." "I was managing the room," Elena snapped, dropping her phone into her purse. "Do you have any idea how much pressure I'm under? The Aurora contract is $50 million, Julian. $50 million. If I get this, I make partner. If I don't, I'm stagnant." She turned to him, her eyes pleading for him to understand the stakes, yet filled with resentment that he couldn't possibly understand the scale. "I need to look like a killer, Julian. I need to look like I command respect. And when you sit there in a suit that doesn't fit, talking about safety, you make me look small." Julian turned to look at her then. The shadows hid his eyes, but his voice was clear. "I didn't realize my love made you look small, Elena." "It's not about love," she groaned, rubbing her temples. "It's about economics. It's about the real world. You earn what? 80 grand a year consulting? My bonus last year was double your salary. I need you to step up, or at least stop dragging me down to the middle class." The car stopped in front of their brownstone. Julian opened the door. The humidity rushed in, choking the air conditioning. "I'll try to be more valuable to you," Julian said. It wasn't an apology. It sounded like a business transaction closing. He walked up the steps ahead of her. Elena watched him go, feeling a prick of guilt that she quickly smothered with self-righteousness. She was doing this for them. One day, he'd understand. Inside the house, Elena went straight to the bedroom to strip off her armor. Julian went to his study, the small, windowless room she constantly nagged him to organize. He closed the door and sat in his ergonomic chair. the one luxury he allowed himself. He didn't turn on the overhead light. He simply woke his computer monitors. 3 screens flared to life, displaying complex market waterfalls, global asset allocations, and a secure communication channel. A message blinked on the center screen. Subject: Aurora Project, Series B funding, final approval needed from Board of Directors, Obsidian Capital. Julian Vance, Principal. Status: pending signature. Julian stared at the screen. He could see the reflection of his cheap suit in the glass. He thought about the laughter at the table. He thought about Elena's hand pulling away from his, dragging me down to the middle class. He typed a response, his fingers moving with the precision of a pianist. Authorize the funding, but flag the Archway & Sons proposal for a Level 5 audit. I want to see every structural vulnerability before we sign. He hit send. In the bedroom, Elena was already asleep, dreaming of skyscrapers. In the study, Julian sat in the dark, the architect of her fate, wondering if he should build her up or let her fall. The request for proposal arrived at Archway & Sons at 8:00 a.m. on Monday, landing in the firm's central server with a digital thud that reverberated through the glass-walled offices. The Aurora Project RFP was 300 pages of dense legal and technical requirements. It was a beast of a document, demanding a vision that married brutalist efficiency with eco-conscious aesthetics. For Elena, it was the Bible. "This is it, people," Arthur Pendleton announced in the conference room, slapping the printed stack of paper onto the mahogany table. The investors, whoever they are hiding behind a shell company called Obsidian. They have deep pockets and zero patience. We have 3 weeks to draft the preliminary concept. Vance, your lead. Elena felt a surge of adrenaline that tasted like metal. "I won't let you down, Arthur." "You better not," Arthur replied, not looking up from his phone. "Marcus Thorne's firm is bidding. I heard Thorne already has a meeting set up with the city zoning commissioner. Don't let him outmaneuver you on the ground game." The mention of Marcus tightened Elena's chest. She spent the next 12 hours in a fugue state of AutoCAD renderings and zoning laws. She missed lunch. She ignored 2 texts from Julian. By the time she took a cab home to Brooklyn, it was nearly midnight. The brownstone was quiet. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish and solitude. Elena dropped her bag on the entryway bench, her shoulders aching. She walked into the kitchen to find a plate of pasta covered in foil with a sticky note. "Heat for 2 mins. Love, J." She stared at the note. Guilt pricked at her, sharp and unwelcome. She crumpled the note and threw it in the trash, opting for a glass of Pinot Grigio instead. She didn't have the energy to process Julian's kindness. Kindness felt like a demand for reciprocity she couldn't afford to give. She carried the wine and her laptop to the living room, collapsing onto the sofa to continue working. 20 minutes later, Julian walked out of his study. He was wearing sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, his hair messy. He looked soft, harmless. "You're home," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "Did you eat?" "Not hungry," Elena murmured, her eyes scanning a structural load report. "The RFP dropped today. It's a nightmare. The investors want a 40% green energy offset, but won't budge on the floor-to-ceiling glass specs. It's physically impossible." Julian walked over and sat on the arm of the sofa, keeping a respectful distance. "Glass technology has improved. Have you looked into photovoltaic glazing? It's expensive, but it solves the offset issue." Elena sighed, closing her eyes for a brief second. "Julian, please. I know you read Wired magazine, but this is actual engineering. It's not about just buying magic windows, it's about budget caps. I'm just saying, if the capital is there, the tech exists, Julian said quietly. If these investors are as big as you say, maybe they care more about the innovation than the line item cost. You don't understand how these people think, Elena snapped, opening her eyes to glare at him. Investors only care about the bottom line. They are sharks. They aren't going to approve a $10 million overrun just because it's cool. Please let me work. I need to focus on reality. Julian stood up slowly. His face was unreadable. Right, reality. I'll leave you to it. He retreated back to his study and closed the door with a soft click. Inside the windowless room, the atmosphere changed instantly. Julian sat in his ergonomic chair and unlocked his workstation. The screens glowed with cold, hard data. He opened the secure portal for Obsidian Capital. He navigated to the project folder. Aurora, bidder submissions. Because Archway & Sons used a cloud-based collaborative platform that Julian's firm had auditor access to, he could see the live updates of their draft proposal. He watched Elena's cursor blink on the screen, thousands of dollars of billable hours pouring into a document that was fundamentally flawed. She was right about the budget caps, but she was wrong about the investors. Julian opened the master budget file, the one only he and his board could see. He looked at the section for sustainability grants. There was a massive unallocated pool of funds specifically for the photovoltaic technology he had just mentioned to his wife. She was trying to save money he wanted her to spend. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the mouse. If he told her, she would ask how he knew. If he didn't tell her, her proposal would look unambitious next to Marcus Thorne's. He chose the third option. Julian opened the Obsidian Auditor interface. He highlighted the section of the RFP regarding energy efficiency in red, a harsh, angry color. He typed a comment in the anonymous feedback box that would be sent to all bidding firms the next morning. Feedback from investor. The current scope for energy efficiency is underwhelming. We are not looking for cost saving. We are looking for legacy. Bidders are encouraged to explore photovoltaic glazing. Budget cap lifted for Section 4. He hit enter. In the living room, Elena's phone pinged with a notification from the project server. New investor addendum posted. She read it, her eyes widening. She sat up straight, whispering to herself, "Holy shit, they lifted the cap." She didn't look toward the study. She didn't wonder why the specific solution her husband had just suggested was now a mandate. She just poured another glass of wine and dived back into the work, grateful for the lucky break. In the study, Julian watched her cursor start deleting the old budget. He took a sip of water, the taste of being right, providing no satisfaction whatsoever. 3 days later, the air in the rooftop bar at Hudson Yards was thin and cold, despite the heaters. It was the kind of place where a martini cost $30, and the view of the Hudson River was a mandatory line item on the bill. Elena sat on a velvet banquette, nursing a vodka tonic. She should have been at the office or at home. Instead, she was here, laughing at a joke Marcus Thorne had just made about a zoning inspector's toupee. "I'm serious," Marcus said, leaning in. His cologne was heavy, sandalwood and money. "The guy wouldn't sign off on the permits until I complimented his hair. This city runs on ego, Elena. Pure, unadulterated ego." "Tell me about it," Elena replied, the tension of the week finally loosening in her shoulders. Marcus made the brutality of their industry feel like a game, an inside joke that only the elite were privy to. It was intoxicating. "You look tired, Vance," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. He wasn't looking at her drink. He was looking at her eyes. "The RFP is a beast. The investors, this Obsidian group, they're demanding impossible things. I feel like I'm running a marathon in heels." "You were built for this, though," Marcus said. He signaled the waiter for another round without asking her. "Some people are built for the sidelines. They want the 401k and the backyard barbecue. But you have the hunger. I saw it at dinner the other night. You looked like you wanted to eat that table alive." Elena felt a flush of pride. "Julian thinks I push too hard." "Julian." Marcus said the name like it was a minor inconvenience, a typo in a contract. "Look, he seems like a nice guy, safe, but you can't race a Formula One car with a restrictor plate on the engine. You need someone who understands the speed." He reached out and brushed a piece of lint off her blazer. The touch lingered a second too long. It wasn't sexual, not explicitly, but it was possessive. It was an acknowledgement of shared status. "I just wish he had a little more fire," Elena confessed, the words slipping out before she could check them. "He's content. I don't understand how anyone can just be content." "Ambition is lonely," Marcus said softly. "That's why we find each other." When Elena finally got home, it was past 10 p.m. The brownstone was silent. She expected Julian to be asleep, but the light under the study door was still burning. She kicked off her heels in the hallway and walked into the kitchen. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A text from Marcus. "Don't let the mediocre drag you down. You're a star, Elena." She smiled, a quick, guilty reflex, and typed a reply. "Thanks for the drinks. Needed the perspective." She set her phone on the marble island and opened the fridge to find water. Julian walked in. He was holding an empty mug. He looked at her, his eyes scanning her face, the slight flush on her cheeks, the relaxed posture that she never had when she was just with him. "Late night at the office?" Julian asked. His voice was neutral. "Client meeting," Elena lied effortlessly. "Strategy session." "You smell like sandalwood," Julian observed. Elena stiffened. "It's the new diffuser in the conference room. Arthur insists on it." Julian nodded slowly. He walked over to the island to refill his water. His hand brushed near her phone. The screen lit up with a notification. Just a generic news alert. But Julian's eyes flickered to it. "Is that a new case?" he asked. "No, same one." "Right," Julian paused. "I tried to call you earlier, about the plumbing quote for the upstairs bath. It went straight to voicemail." "My battery died," she said, taking a sip of water. "I just charged it in the cab." Julian reached out, his finger hovering over her screen. "Can I check the time? My watch is upstairs." He tapped the screen. He swiped up to enter the passcode, the one that had been their anniversary, 10/14, for the last 5 years. The screen shook. Incorrect passcode. Julian froze. He didn't look up immediately. He stared at the 4 empty dots, the digital gate that had been slammed in his face. "You changed it," he said. Elena snatched the phone off the counter, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Security update. The firm required a 6-digit alphanumeric code. IT policy. It's a hassle." "Right," Julian said again. He looked at her then, and she saw it. The calculation behind his eyes. He wasn't hurt. He was assessing. like he was looking at a graph where the trend line had just dipped below the recovery threshold. IT policy, he repeated. I'm exhausted, Julian, Elena said, turning away to hide the tremor in her hands. I'm going to bed. Good night, Elena. Julian watched her walk up the stairs. He knew Archway & Sons' IT policy because he had reviewed their security protocols during the due diligence for the Aurora bid. They didn't require personal device passcode changes. He looked down at his own phone. He opened the Obsidian Secure app. He didn't text her. He didn't confront her. Instead, he opened the file for Marcus Thorne. Thorne Development Group. He tapped the tab labeled Liabilities and Leverage. If she wanted to play with fire, he would make sure she saw exactly how easily it burned. Thursday morning brought a torrential downpour that turned the New York streets into gray rivers. Inside the Vance brownstone, the mood was equally storm-tossed. Elena was pacing the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice tight with panic. Arthur, I don't know why we haven't heard yet. The Phase 1 notifications went out to the Tier 1 firms an hour ago. If we were cut... No, Arthur. I submitted the addendum. I did everything. She stopped pacing and leaned against the counter, her knuckles white as she gripped the marble edge. I can't lose this, Arthur. I can't. Julian sat at the breakfast table, nursing a cup of black coffee. He watched his wife unravel. She looked fragile, stripped of her corporate armor, terrified of the mediocrity she so despised. He wanted to stand up, hold her, and tell her it was already done. But he couldn't. Instead, he stood up and quietly cleared his mug. It will be fine, Elena, he said, his voice low. She spun on him, covering the microphone. Shh! I'm on with the managing partner. Not now, Julian. He nodded and retreated to the sanctuary of his study. He locked the door and sat before the glowing monitors. The room was soundproof, a necessary expense he had explained away as needing quiet for data entry. In reality, it was the command center of a billion-dollar portfolio. On the center screen, a video conference window was open. It was muted on his end. The faces of 3 senior analysts from Obsidian Capital stared back at him. Julian unmuted his microphone. Go ahead, Silas. Silas, a sharp-featured man in London, adjusted his glasses. Sir, the recommendation is to cut Archway & Sons. Their liquidity is acceptable, but their creative lead, Mrs. Vance, is flagging in our predictive models. Her recent work hours are erratic, and the revised proposal they submitted feels desperate. It lacks the structural discipline of the Thorne Group. Julian looked at the graph Silas had pulled up. It showed Archway's viability score dipping into the yellow zone. Mathematically, Silas was right. Archway was the risky bet. Marcus Thorne was the safe one. Thorne is solid, Silas continued. He's arrogant, but his numbers hold water. If we want the Aurora Project to break ground by Q1, we cut Archway and move Thorne to the lead. Julian leaned back in his chair. Through the walls, he could almost feel Elena's vibration, her sheer terror of failure. He remembered the woman she used to be, the one who sketched buildings on napkins at diner dates, who dreamed of changing the skyline, not just owning it. He looked at the reject button on his screen. It would be so easy. He could end the project, end the stress, end her connection to Marcus Thorne. If she lost the bid, she would come home. She would be sad, but she would be his again. But that was the logic of a jailer, not a husband. Keep them, Julian said. Silas blinked. Sir? The risk metrics, I see the metrics, Silas. But Archway has a vision the others lack. We aren't just building a tax shelter. We're building a landmark. Keep Archway in the running. Move them to Phase 2. And the Thorn Group? Julian paused. He touched the file on his desktop named Thorn Liabilities. He knew things about Marcus Thorn that even Marcus didn't know. Hidden debts, leveraged assets, a house of cards waiting for a breeze. Keep Thorn in too, Julian said coldly. I want him close where we can watch him. Understood. Notifications going out now. Julian cut the feed. 10 seconds later, a scream echoed from the kitchen. It wasn't fear this time. It was pure, unadulterated triumph. Julian unlocked the study door and walked out. Elena was standing in the middle of the kitchen, jumping up and down, clutching her phone. "We're in!" she shouted, her face radiant. "Oh my God, Julian! We made the shortlist! Phase 2! She ran to him, hugging him fiercely. For a moment, the smell of her shampoo and the warmth of her body made him forget the cold calculations on his screen. He hugged her, back, burying his face in her neck. "I knew you could do it," he whispered. She pulled back, breathless, her eyes shining. But then her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, and a different kind of smile touched her lips. A secretive, knowing smirk. "It's Marcus," she said, almost to herself. "He made it through too. He wants to meet to discuss friendly competition strategy." She looked up at Julian, the adrenaline shifting her focus back to the game. "I have to go to the office. We need to prep. Don't wait up for dinner." She grabbed her bag and was out the door before the rain could even settle. Julian stood alone in the kitchen. The silence rushed back in. He had just spent $50 million of risk capital to buy a smile that was immediately directed at another man. He walked to the window and watched her get into a cab. He had saved her career, but as he watched the taillights fade into the gray storm, he wondered if he had just financed the end of his marriage. 2 weeks before the final presentation, the living room of the brownstone had ceased to be a home. It was a war room. Large format blueprints were taped to the walls, obscuring the family photos. Scale models made of balsa wood and foam core occupied the dining table. The air smelled of stale coffee and high-grade anxiety. Elena sat on the floor, surrounded by a sea of red-lined sketches. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and dark circles had permanently settled under her eyes. She was staring at the central atrium design for the Aurora Tower, chewing on the end of her stylus. "It doesn't work," she muttered, frustration vibrating in her voice. "The cantilever puts too much torque on the western load-bearing columns. If I reinforce it, I lose the aesthetic. If I don't, the building sways." Julian walked in from the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of tea. He stepped carefully over the scattered papers. He set a mug down near her knee, but she didn't acknowledge it. He stood there for a moment, looking at the large schematic taped to the television screen. His eyes traced the lines of force distribution. It was an ambitious design, beautiful but reckless. "You need a dampener," Julian said quietly. Elena didn't look up. "Not now, Julian. I'm thinking. If you shift the elevator core 3 meters to the north," Julian continued, pointing a finger at the void in the blueprint, "you can counterbalance the cantilever without adding external steel. It's simple physics. It creates a natural dampening effect." Elena stopped chewing her stylus. She turned her head slowly to look at him. Her eyes were cold, narrowed with a mix of exhaustion and contempt. Shift the core? She repeated, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Do you have any idea what that does to the floor plate efficiency? You can't just move a massive concrete shaft because you think it looks better, Julian. This isn't The Sims. It's not about looks, Elena. It's about structural integrity. The way you have it now, the stress fractures will start appearing within 5 years. Elena stood up, kicking a pile of sketches aside. The tea mug rattled on the floor. Stop, she snapped. Just stop. You work with spreadsheets, Julian. You organize data. You do not build skyscrapers. Do not come in here with your layman's logic and try to fix a $50 million problem. I'm trying to help you, Julian said, his voice steady, though his jaw tightened. You're distracting me, Elena shouted. The sound echoed off the high ceilings. Every time I look up, you're there, hovering, asking about dinner, asking about the plumbing, offering advice on things you don't understand. It's suffocating. She paced the room, her hands throwing gestures at the air. Marcus doesn't have to deal with this, she said, the name slipping out like a weapon. He's surrounded by people who push him forward, not anchors who hold him back. Julian went very still. Is that what I am, an anchor? You're safe, Julian. You're small. And right now, I need to be big. I need to be in a headspace where failure isn't an option. And frankly, looking at you, it reminds me of everything I'm trying to rise above. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and final. Elena took a breath, smoothing her shirt, regaining her composure but not her kindness. I think you should stay at a hotel, she said. Just until the presentation is over. I need the space. I need to focus without this. She gestured vaguely at him, at the marriage. Julian looked at her. He looked at the woman who had vowed to be with him in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer. It seemed the richer part came with fine print he hadn't read. You want me to leave my own house, Julian stated. It's for the project, Julian. Don't be dramatic. It's just for 2 weeks. If I walk out that door, Elena, Julian said softly, I'm not coming back just because you win a contract. If I don't win this contract, she retorted, turning her back to him to face the blueprints, there won't be anything left of me to come back to anyway. Julian didn't argue. He didn't yell. He walked past her, up the stairs to the bedroom. 10 minutes later, he came down with a single duffel bag. Elena was already back on the floor, sketching furiously, moving the elevator core exactly where he had suggested, claiming the idea as her own before the ink was even dry. Julian paused at the front door. He looked at his wife one last time. She didn't turn around. He opened the door and walked out into the Brooklyn night. He hailed a cab. Where to? The driver asked. The Pierre Hotel, Julian said, and then take me to the Obsidian Capital offices. He pulled out his phone. He opened the file for the Aurora Project. He looked at the timeline. The final board meeting was in 10 days. He wasn't going to cancel the project. He was going to let her finish it. He was going to let her build her monument to ambition, and then he was going to make sure she understood exactly who owned the ground it stood on. The silence in the brownstone was absolute. For 3 days, Elena had lived in the vacuum she had requested. No hum of the television, no sound of Julian chopping vegetables, no footsteps in the hallway. Just her, the blueprints, and the crushing weight of the looming presentation. It was 2:00 a.m. on a Wednesday when her printer jammed. Elena groaned, rubbing her face. She needed to print the revised schematics for the lighting rig. She pulled the paper tray out, empty. She checked the supply closet. Empty. She remembered Julian kept boxes of supplies in his study. The room she mocked. The room she never entered. She pushed open the door. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and dust. It was obsessively organized. A single ergonomic chair faced a blank desk. To the side, on a small filing cabinet, sat an iPad Pro. It wasn't the cracked model he used for reading news in bed. This one was sleek, encased in matte black leather. She ignored it, rummaging through the drawers for paper. She found a ream of high-quality bond paper, better than what she used at the firm. As she pulled it out, her elbow knocked the iPad. The screen lit up. It didn't ask for a passcode. The device had been left unlocked, the security timeout disabled, likely because Julian had left in a hurry when she evicted him. Elena glanced at the screen, intending to turn it off. Her hand froze. It wasn't a browser or a game. It was an email interface. Dark mode. Minimalist. The header read, Obsidian Capital, Executive Secure Server. She blinked, her tired eyes trying to focus. Obsidian Capital, the investors, the faceless entity she was terrified of. Why was this on Julian's screen? Curiosity beat out ethics in a heartbeat. She touched the screen. The inbox was full of threads with subject lines that made her stomach turn. Asset allocation. Tokyo infrastructure. Q3 liquidity report. Aurora Project. Risk assessment. Thorn versus Archway. Her breath caught in her throat. She tapped the Aurora thread. A message from S. Kitteridge, London, read, Sir, regarding the structural revision for Archway's atrium. The new load-bearing shift is brilliant. It solves the vibration issue. Should we approve the budget increase for the materials? The reply, sent from this device 3 days ago, was signed simply, JV authorize it, but tell them to source the steel domestically. I want the supply chain short. JV Elena stepped back, her legs hitting the desk chair. JV Julian Vance. No, she whispered. The sound was flat in the empty room. No, this is... He's reading leaked emails. He hacked it. He's a data analyst. She scrolled up. There were PDF attachments, articles of incorporation, Obsidian Capital. She opened one. Principal Managing Partner, Julian Vance. The letters seemed to float on the glass. The man she had accused of checking credit card points for free toasters was managing a portfolio that could buy her entire firm 10 times over. She dropped the iPad onto the desk as if it were burning hot. It didn't make sense. If he was this powerful, why the cheap suits? Why the sedan? Why let her humiliate him at dinner parties? Why let Marcus Thorne treat him like a servant? He's lying, she rationalized, her mind frantically spinning to preserve her worldview. It's a simulation, a game. He's pretending. But she remembered the friendly competition audit. She remembered how the investor feedback perfectly mirrored Julian's layman advice about the dampener. She looked around the small, windowless room. It wasn't a dungeon. It was a cockpit. And she had been flying blind the entire time. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Marcus. Thinking of you. Big day coming up. Let's crush it. Elena looked at the text. Usually, it gave her a thrill. Now, it felt cheap. She looked back at the iPad, at the initials JV glowing in the dark. She backed out of the room and closed the door. She stood in the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She needed to focus on the pitch. That was the only thing that was real. The presentation. She would deal with Julian's little fantasy life later. She would confront him about the fake emails and the stolen data after she won. She walked back to her printer, clutching the paper, unaware that her hands were trembling. She was building a skyscraper on a fault line, and the tremors had just begun. The headquarters of Obsidian Capital occupied the top 3 floors of a steel needle piercing the sky of Midtown Manhattan. The conference room was a fortress of glass, offering a panoramic view of the city that made the cars below look like bacteria. Elena sat at the long walnut table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide the tremors. Beside her, Arthur Pendleton was sweating through his collar. Across from them sat Marcus Thorne, looking relaxed, checking his watch with an air of bored inevitability. "Relax, Vance," Marcus whispered, leaning across the table. "They're just money guys. They don't know a cornice from a cantilever. Just dazzle them with the renders and let the numbers do the talking." Elena nodded stiffly. "Right." She couldn't shake the image of the iPad in the dark study. She had told herself for 48 hours that it was a mistake, a prank, a misunderstanding. Julian was at a hotel in Queens. He wasn't here. He couldn't be here. The heavy double doors opened. The room went silent. 3 men and 1 woman entered, carrying thin folios. They were the vetting committee. They took their seats efficiently, leaving the chair at the head of the table empty. "The chairman will be joining us shortly," the woman said. Her voice was clipped, British. "Please begin your introductions." Arthur stood up, launching into his rehearsed speech about legacy and heritage. Marcus followed, charming and aggressive, selling his vision of luxury. Elena stood up last. She felt lightheaded. She walked to the podium, queuing up her slides. "The Aurora Project," she began, her voice gaining strength as she looked at her work on the massive screen, "is not just a building. It is a living organism. It breathes with the city." She was 5 minutes into her pitch, explaining the thermal regulation systems, when the double doors opened again. This time nobody spoke. A man walked in. He wasn't wearing a Banana Republic suit. He was wearing a charcoal Tom Ford 3-piece that was tailored to within a millimeter of perfection. He didn't walk with the shuffling gait of a tired husband. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who owned the air in the room. Marcus Thorne stood up, a confused smile on his face. "Julian? What are you—" Did Elena forget her lunch? Julian didn't look at Marcus. He didn't look at Elena. He walked straight to the head of the table. The vetting committee shifted in their seats, straightening their spines. The British woman closed her folio. Julian pulled out the chair, the chairman's chair, and sat down. He placed a single folder on the table. He looked up, his hazel eyes scanning the room. They were cold, clear, and absolutely terrifying. "Please sit down, Mr. Thorne," Julian said. His voice was the same, yet entirely different. It had a timbre of authority that resonated off the glass walls. Marcus blinked. I don't understand. Is this a joke?" "The only joke in this room, Marcus, is your liquidity ratio," Julian said calmly. "Sit down." Marcus sat. He looked like he had been struck in the chest. Elena stood at the podium, frozen. Her clicker felt slippery in her hand. The man at the end of the table was her husband. The man she had kicked out of her house. The man she had told was safe and small. He turned his gaze to her. There was no warmth, no recognition of their 10 years of marriage. He looked at her like she was a line item on a spreadsheet. "Continue, Mrs. Vance," Julian said. "You were discussing the thermal regulation." Elena's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it would crack her ribs. She stammered. The structural dampener, Julian prompted, leaning back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. I believe you shifted the elevator core 3 meters to the north to account for the torque. A bold move. I'd like to hear the physics behind it. It was the exact solution he had given her in their living room. The solution she had mocked. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The shame was hot and immediate, flooding her face. He knew. He had always known. Every condescending remark she had made, every time she had rolled her eyes at his smallness, he had been sitting on a throne she couldn't even see. She looked at Marcus, who was staring at Julian with wide, fearful eyes. She looked at Arthur, who was pale as a sheet. She looked back at Julian. Yes, Elena managed to say, her voice trembling. The dampener. Proceed, Julian commanded. She forced herself to speak. She forced herself to present the slide. But she wasn't pitching to a board anymore. She was confessing. With every technical specification, with every mention of efficiency and vision, she felt stripped bare. She was selling her dream to the man she had betrayed, and he was watching her with the dispassionate gaze of an executioner waiting to drop the blade. The boardroom cleared out with the hushed efficiency of a funeral procession. Arthur Pendleton looked like he might faint from relief as he gathered his files, bowing slightly to Julian before exiting. Marcus Thorne was less fortunate. As he stood to leave, attempting to salvage his dignity with a handshake, Julian didn't even rise. Mr. Thorne, Julian said, his eyes still fixed on a document. My analysts will be sending a margin call on your outstanding loans with our subsidiary banks by close of business today. I suggest you answer the phone. Marcus blanched, his confident veneer cracking to reveal the panic beneath. He didn't say a word. He simply turned and walked out, shrinking with every step until the heavy doors clicked shut behind him. Elena was left alone with the chairman. The silence stretched, thin and taut. The panoramic view of New York seemed to mock her. The city she wanted to conquer was now just a backdrop to the man she had underestimated. Julian finally looked up. He picked up a thick document bound in blue leather, the Aurora Project contract. He uncapped a fountain pen, signed the bottom line with a fluid, practiced motion, and slid it across the polished walnut table toward her. Congratulations, Elena, he said. The project is yours. Phase 2 funding is approved. You have full creative control. Elena looked at the document. It was everything she had wanted for 5 years. It was the partnership. It was the legacy. She didn't pick it up. Julian, she whispered. Her legs felt weak. She walked around the table, moving toward him. Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me treat you like that? Julian capped the pen. The click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Because I wanted to know who you were when the money wasn't on the table, he said. He stood up, turning to look out the window. It's easy to love a man who can buy you a skyline, Elena. It's harder to respect a man who clips coupons. I needed to know if you valued me, or just the safety net. I do love you, Elena pleaded, reaching out to touch his arm. I was just stressed. I was scared. I wanted us to be secure. Julian stepped away from her touch. The rejection was physical, absolute. No, he corrected gently. You wanted us to be impressive. There is a difference. He walked back to his briefcase. Not the battered leather messenger bag he brought to the brownstone, but a sleek, hard-shell case. He pulled out a second envelope. It wasn't blue. It was manila. He placed it on the table next to the Aurora contract. "What is this?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "You said you needed space until the project was done," Julian said. "You said my presence was suffocating. I realized you were right. We want different things. You want a partner who is a mirror, reflecting your ambition back at you. I want a partner who sees me, even in the dark." Elena stared at the envelope. She knew what was inside. "Julian, please, we can fix this. Now that I know, now that we're on the same level." "That's just it, Elena." Julian cut her off, his voice devoid of anger, filled only with a terrible, calm finality. "We aren't on the same level. You think this," he gestured to the office, "the expensive suit, the skyline, makes me worthy of you. But the fact that you needed this to see me, that makes you unworthy of me." He checked his watch. "My driver is downstairs. You can stay in the brownstone. I bought a place in the city closer to the firm. My lawyers will handle the rest." He walked toward the door. He didn't look back. He didn't hesitate. "Julian!" she called out, the desperation finally breaking through her shock. He stopped at the door, his hand on the handle. "You got the contract, Elena," he said, not turning around. "You got the building. You got the status. You made the trade. Don't ask for a refund now." The door closed. Elena stood alone in the glass tower. On the table lay two piles of paper. On the left, a $50 million contract that would make her a legend in her field. On the right, the end of the only real thing she had ever possessed. She reached out and touched the cold leather of the contract. It felt heavy. It felt like stone. Outside, the sun began to set over the city, casting long, empty shadows across the floor. And for the first time, Elena realized just how cold it was at the top.